There we go. Welcome, Professor Vaidyanathan. Thank you. Again, I'm Ankur Patel, Director of Advancement for Hindu University of America. We're just at the start of the hour, and we are going to get underway on our webinar on caste as social capital. This is our second webinar on this topic. It's so important in so many ways. Thank you for joining us. Let me give a quick kind of framework. I'll introduce Professor Vaidyanathan. Kalyanji will give some framework, and we're going to hand it over to dig into this important issue. But we know the systematic effort to marginalize, disrespect, and trivialize Hinduism has been an ongoing project of Europe and now America for centuries. Most Americans are not aware of this and subconsciously buy into simplified false narratives that depict Hindus as tribal, superstitious, hierarchical, oppressive, violent, and dangerous. Stereotypes and generalizations supported by anecdotes, regurgitated by a biased media, has actually poisoned the minds of many people across the world, especially Americans who watch too much cable news, and they often use caste as a point of irredeemable criticism. And Hindus throughout the world are huge, fractious, diverse, and caste itself, and we'll get into this, is a Portuguese word, right, imposed on an infinitely complex Varna Jati system that has transformed and changed over the centuries, and Professor Vaidyanathan will go into that in detail. I'd just like to end on this point. The European interpretation of caste imposed upon India puts Europeans outside of our caste system altogether, but it puts us underneath their understanding of racial and cultural hierarchy. This is a separate kind of macro caste system that they're imposing upon us without even mentioning it. And I think it's important to detail it. So our special guest is Professor Vaidyanathan, who's a retired professor of finance from IIM Bangalore. He's a two-time Fulbright scholar and was a fellow at the Indian Council of Social Science Research. He's a member of the Advisory Council of the Vivekananda International Foundation, New Delhi, and is currently the Cholas Ramaswamy Visiting Professor of Public Policy at Shastra University in Tamil Nadu, and has written an important book titled Caste as Social Capital, which we are going to get into. I'm going to hand it over to Kalyanji, who will give it a little bit more framing, and thank you for joining us for this important webinar.
Okay, terrific, everybody. Good morning. Welcome. I'll ask a couple of quick questions on the chat window. Kindly respond in the chat window, okay? So the question to all of you is, my first question. Did you attend the first webinar? So the question is, did you attend the first webinar that was held in the month of September? Yeah, some people have attended, some people have not attended, listening to a recording. Yeah. So I just want to mention that this is not an isolated webinar. There is a series that we are starting on, and we're going to examine this subject matter from a variety of perspectives. I will do a little bit of a setup for today, okay, by sharing a few slides, and then we will hand it over to Professor Vaidyanathan. Give me one moment here. Yeah. Okay, here we go. So Varna Jati, caste as social capital. That's the series. That's the topic for today. And Varna Jati, caste re-examination is the whole series. Now, first of all, we all ought to know and know for certain that the word caste is nowhere to be found in the native Hindu vocabulary until the late 1800s. I mean, when it gets systematized. So the word came from the Portuguese word casta, and eventually it gets applied to describe the system accruing in India. which was observed by first the Portuguese and then later on by the English. Now, the frequent objection, as soon as we say this, the objection that is raised is, but are they not the same thing? You know, what does it mean? What does it matter whether we call it Varna Jati or whether we call it the caste system? What does it matter? Are they not the same thing? You know, whether we call something water, or whether we call it pani or jalam or whatever it is, are they not the same thing? How does it matter? You know, what is this distinction really matter? So it is one of the problems of contemporary understanding is that the distinction is either not made adequately, or that distinction has receded as though it does not matter. Now, we're not going to answer that question today, but I want to just place that question: are they the same thing, or is there a fundamental distortion that arises when you translate Varna Jati into the phenomenon of caste? That's the first point. The second point is, it is self-evident to all of us that whereas contemporary society is organized into this duo of state and individual, where everybody is just an individual looking after their own interests and their own concerns, and then you have to deal with the state primarily. This is supposed to be the ideal way society should be organized, because that's how Europe has organized its societies. It's very clear and self-evident that Indian society inserts another entity in the middle. Between the state and the individual, there is a group, and that there is a community, and these communities are enormous, you know, in number, varied. And if you look for the primary ordering principle behind the organization of these groups, what was it? You'll find that it's very hard to put your finger on it. And there are several questions that are represented here. We're not going to answer them today, but just highlight and note that the group or community was given a certain priority in the Hindu world. Next, there was a massive distortion in the discourse introduced by a paradigm shift that occurred when India went under the heel of the colonial empire. And of course, in this graph depicts the relative GDP as shares of world GDP of three countries: India, USA, and England. And this data is taken from Angus Madison's data, which should be well known by now. But there was a paradigm shift in understanding Indian phenomena, Hindu phenomena, introduced by colonial discourse, which has become sort of received knowledge now, established fact, uncontestable fact. It has transferred epistemic authority to the West. The West gets to describe how India is, how Hinduism is, and Hindus have to now be recipients of Western knowledge, not only in science and technology, but also about our own society. So this is the paradigm shift that occurred, you know, where previously the Hindu culture was a knowledge-producing culture. It has inevitably now become a knowledge-receiving culture from the West. We look up to the West in all manner of speaking. Okay, the last point. So this frames Hinduism a certain way, and it takes away. It has moved away from the language of the Hindu world and reframes it into a set of concerns that are now considered normative in the study of the Hindu world. Right. So there's a loss of language, and there's also a whole new set of concerns that never existed to begin with in the Hindu world, but now are considered not only normative but eternally applicable to the Hindu world. So this is a paradigm shift. And whereas the Varna Jati was framed inside a cluster of concepts, you can call it a conceptual cluster, that was grounded in these terms in Sanskrit: dharma, karma, janma, punarjanma, guna, sattva, rajas, tamas, etc., etc. Now, these are the new terms by which we are supposed to be studying these phenomena. And these terms have become the standard, meaning that to try to recover the old terminology and the significance of that terminology, the meanings, the clusters of meanings, and the world view, the cosmology represented by those terms, those ontologies, is supposed to now be regressive. So in order to be progressive, we ought to talk about the words on the right side, and that is how it has become normal to talk about these phenomena. Now, we proposed a hypothesis that jatis perhaps were never static to begin with in our Hindu world. In other words, this is a hypothesis, okay? So you should not relate to it like it's the truth, but it is a hypothesis, a proposition. So the two axes of Varna and Jati, which are two-dimensional, got collapsed into a unitary dimension called caste. And then you had subcastes and sub-subcastes and so on. And the fine distinction between these two dimensions was lost. So we made the hypothesis that, over time, jatis were not static. They moved over time. They moved across the Varna scale, if you will. If you were to call it a scale for a moment. Okay. So just as a jati can collapse and fall, many jatis collapsed and fell and entered into enormous poverty and destitution during the colonial era. Jatis can also rise over time. They can rise over time. And of course, the four swim lanes here, you can take it as the four major varnas. So this is a hypothesis. Okay, we proposed this hypothesis in the previous webinar. Today we're going to look at the data. Is there any credibility to this hypothesis? Okay, and with that quick setup, I would like to now hand the webinar over to Professor Vaidyanathan, and he'll take the conversation from here for the next 45 minutes or so. Then we'll get into Q&A. Okay, over to you, Professor.
Oh, thank you very much for that kind introduction to Patel as well as to Kalyanji. And good morning or afternoon, I do not know, for most of the participants there. For me, it is actually good night because it is nearing 10 o'clock in the night. Anyhow, is indeed a interesting thing. I'm not going to go into the entire, the past, the issues and other things. I'm just going to take a caste as what it is today, what we all know. Okay, and we all know that caste is a Portuguese origin word, and we had earlier Varna and various other, and it's mostly lateral, not hierarchic. That's very important to stress. And in India, actually, very interesting, 561 kingdoms were merged by Sardar Vallabh Patel, who is interestingly today is his Punyatithi, his birth day, and of that, except one or two, almost all of them were SC, ST, OBC groups were ruling it. SC, ST, OBC, I am not, I'm sure most will be aware of it. It's called scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and other backward caste. So this is the terminology commonly used in India. So they were the rulers actually. And another interesting point to stress is, a lot of people say we had this 1500 years and 2000 years and other thing, caste oppression and other. but there is no caste wars which have been identified or discussed. I have checked with some Marxist historians about it. They have also agreed with that. There is no caste wars in India. That is between Tevars and Nadars, or between Ahirs and Kurmis, or Yadavs and Kurmis. And there has never been a caste war actually. There are some clashes which are post-independence. We will come to that much later because of the electoral system. So we don't have any documented caste wars in India. And there have been several changes due to various reforms and various type of internal changes which has come about. The first enumeration of this entire caste was done in 1881 by the British. That is the first, right? Somebody writes that lower caste were suppressed so much, question of caste war doesn't arise. I am very, many people tell me this. I am very puzzled. 2000 years or 1000 years or even 800 years, there can't be any suppressed group without conducting any war. Anyhow, this, if you look at Europe, if you look at, unless you say India is a very unique country, any other place, there has always been several amount of wars. Anyhow, I'm not getting into that. I would like you to, and of course, at the beginning itself, I should have told, kindly buy my book and have a look at it. More important is you may or may not read it. If you buy it, it's adequate for me, from my purposes. So 1881 census first created this enumerated caste. Till then, there was no enumeration of caste. And it created a hierarchy. Very, very important. Prior to 1881, I have not come across anywhere this hierarchy of 1, 2, 3, 4. There is only one Purusha Sukta which is often quoted, which is also not appropriately quoted. Anyhow, it is quoted that the Brahmins came from head and Vaishyas came from the chest and other thing. But that doesn't really say anything about hierarchy. Anyhow, first hierarchy attempted in 1881. Let's be very clear about it. Dipankar Gupta, one of the renowned sociologists, say there are as many caste hierarchies as there are caste in India. Anyhow, the 1921 caste were enumerated in 1881 census. Of that, 1126 had population of less than 1,000. 275 caste had less than 10 members, and quite a number of them had one member caste. Just what we call in set theory language, single element set, one member only. He claimed that he belongs to that caste. So the British were not very happy about it. In the sense, they felt that the whole country could be categorized. And 1891 census commissioner gives some reason for this categorization into hierarchy. He says in Britain, we have this four-fold categorization of, senior officers in the dormant system, senior civil servants and middle level officers, clerks and peons. So in Britain, by and large, we have this four-fold category followed many places. So we thought we will also create a mirror image of Britain in India. That is what is justification. Second, what they did was, because of this lack of numbers which they could get in terms of caste, they asked the enumerator to decide the respondent's caste. This is something which has never happened anywhere in the world actually. So the enumerator will look at the person, according to his own judgment. If he is having, diamond in all the 5 fingers and ring, and if his house is relatively wealthy, he will put him as a Vaishya. And if that fellow is tall and well built with a mush and other thing, he will say he is Kshatriya. So the enumerators were asked to. So this is the first and foremost. This is what I call the problem in the womb, in the beginning itself. So they decided, and they did this, and this was continued in 2001 and 2011. The 1901, 1911. 1931 was the last caste census India conducted. After that, there were no caste census. Because what happened, 1941, we had the World War, Second World War. So there was no census itself properly done. And 1951, Jawaharlal Nehru in his wisdom decided we have abolished caste. So that column was removed from the census questionnaires. People are not asked to what caste you belong. Much later we will see the 1983 decision of this Mandal Commission of Reservation was based on 1931 caste census of the British. So the pro rata, they took the numbers and then decided and came around with a figure of 27%. So that the total reservation is 50%, 49.5%. Earlier it was SC and STs were 22.5. So plus 27 became. So 1931 is the last census where we have a number of people belonging to different castes. Now, there has been clamor by various political parties and that we should have this census done about caste and everything. 2011, they wanted to introduce 2011, 10 years once we conduct census. 2011, they decided, but the census commissioner told it is not going to be an easy task. Kindly do not jump into this. Anyhow, after much discussion, the government decided, and 2011 it was an additional information collected from the census. And then the whole thing was such a massive exercise which was undertaken. And the caste census, it covered 330 million households in 2011. That is the additional to the main census which was collected. And 4.6 million entries were there of these 330 million households. 330 million households mean in our context 33 crores households were covered. That means 72 households identified themselves with a particular caste. If you divide your 330 million by 4.6 million. So it created a huge amount of issues. And of that, 65,000 caste could not be clearly identified by the respective state governments. So there was as the census general, the registrar of census warned, it's not going to be an easy task. And so the whole data was to be cleaned and it was handed over to Niti Aayog to come out with some meaningful things. And I do not think Niti Aayog has gone ahead and collected anything more than what is there. That's all. It is, and it has not yet been published also. That is another important thing. So we still have only 1931 number of people belonging to different caste categories. Among the states, Karnataka has got relatively better data collection on this issue of backward communities in order to provide some state level reservation and other thing. So in 2017, actually, they conducted a survey of various castes. It was demanded by various groups. They told that based on this only you should be giving various type of benefits of reservation. Because, and generally in Karnataka, it has been assumed that Linkayats are the largest component. In those, generally it is assumed to be around 18%. Don't ask me why. It is generally assumed in the past. And then it is assumed also Gaudas or what are called Okkaligas in Karnataka are another 12 to 13%. And these two groups are normally considered as dominant groups. And it is expected the chief minister has to come from one of the two groups. Exception was Ramakrishna Hegde. That we will have to discuss separately. Anyhow, so this census was conducted, caste census. It has not been released. It has been put into what is called deep freezer. It's in a cupboard under lock and key. And every time some groups ask for it to be released and then they keep quiet. What happened is they found that as per this leaked reports, something like SCs constitute 20% of Karnataka and Muslims constitute 16%, which comes to 36%. Along with some other smaller grouping, it's around 40%. The Linkayats are actually 13.5 and Okkaligas or Gaudas are only 10.7 or something, very low. It's totally contrary to what is the general assumption in political discussion. Be that as it may, it has not been released and I don't think it will ever be released as per my understanding of the current situation. So the first important point to note is we do not have what is this number of people belonging to X caste or Y caste in India other than 1931 census. Let's be very clear about it. If anybody says that so many are Gaudas or so many are Yadavs and other things, these are all what I call POTA data, POTA, pulled out of thin air. You know, you just pull it out and then say that this is. In one TV discussion, one gentleman told that 35% in this constituency are Yadavs. After he came out of the television room, I asked him, how do you know this? He told, no, sir, the anchor belongs to Yadav. So I thought better to go along with that. So that's a type of our information content or number of people belonging to different castes is zero, except 1931 census. Let me repeat it very, very clearly. So all other talk and discussion are all based on assumptions and various other type of inferences, or or your own feel good factor or wishes or anything. And caste is each caste, subcaste has got their own sampradaya. That is very, very important to realize. It's not just something to talk about caste. Every subcaste, subcaste have got what are sampradayas. It's a system pertaining to birth. Then Namakaranam, when do you name the child? And Mundakam, when do you shave his head off? These are all different samskaras followed by different subcaste. Some people name the child at the time of birth itself. Some people name it after 10 days. Some people name it only after 1 year. Some people even not prepare what are known as the kundli or the horoscope for 1 year, because it is believed that you are not expected to create the horoscope before 1 year. Anyhow, so different people have different types. I know people who name after 6 months, but they tell the registrar, we have already named him as Rajesh or Ganesh or whatever it is. Keep that name pending. We will register it only on that date. Similarly, there are about betrothal before marriage, and marriage, of course, very, very important. Not all subcaste, sub-subcaste have the same type of systems in marriage. And also treatment of women during childbirth, what we call in terms of nowadays it is popularly called baby shower and himandam and various post-childbirth and also different stages in 60s and 70s, 80s in terms of celebration for the man. And death, very important. Not all castes have identical tradition in death. Some have got 13 days, some have got 6 days only. Some have got 12 days Vaikunth Samaradhana. Various type of things are followed. Most of the caste, of course, in Hindu system burn their bodies. Even there are some in India which do not burn. They bury their bodies. Food habits, of course, everybody knows, significantly different. Only commonality by and large among the Hindu community is they do not take beef as a non-vegetarian dish. Even that is counter example can be given in terms of Kerala, where that has become very common and other thing. And method of preparation of food is also different among different type of subcaste. This is another interesting thing. It's not the same way it is prepared. And dress habits are different, except in the modern time, many people are having a similar type of European dress, which is used another thing. Celebration of festivals, completely different, actually, not identical or anything among various, and different type of subcaste have different stress on the type of festival. Some are more inclined towards, for instance, Krishna Jayanti, or some are more inclined towards, for instance, Diwali. Some are much more, for celebrating Vinayak Chaturthi. These differences are significant. Family, extended family. So most important is, whenever people say about abolishing caste or some bombastic thing people talk about, you cannot order all the people to have mundakam on the same time. 4th month you must have. There will be shortage of barbers in India. Anyhow, so this is not going to be one thing you can always say in your drawing room discussion, another thing. That's one of the reason. Much later we will, if somebody is interested, is uniform civil code is not going to be an easy task in India. It's very easy to talk about UCC and all that thing. Anyhow, that was recognized by Guruji Golwalkar of the RSS. That's a separate thing. Except we have some interesting information on economic census. This economic census is a very vast undertaken by the Central Statistical Organization. It covers all economic activity which is performed by individuals, groups, partnership firm, proprietorship firm, HUF, as well as by corporates, MNCs, everything. In other words, in our context, loosely calling, the roadside of this Pani Puri seller to Hindustan Lever, the company, is covered by the economic survey, economic census. It's not a survey, sorry. So they conducted in 1998 was the first one, 2005 and 2013. These are the 2017 data is yet to be released, but we can make some inferences based upon my understanding. It deals with all what are called own account enterprises as well as establishment. Establishment means you have at least one paid worker. Own account enterprise means you conduct the affair on your own, in the sense you, your wife, or your children and family. And there is no paid labor associated with that. If you look at it, it's something very interesting. In the year 1998, they covered 30.4 million enterprises in India of various, as I told you, various sizes, shapes, and all human activities which are again, resulting in some production and sales, right? Obviously, it doesn't cover the household chores done by the housewife. That economics doesn't recognize it as a activity even. So that's not, so 30.4 million. Of that, 45% was SC, ST and OBCs. 45% owned by enterprises in India. And SC, ST, OBC, and of that OBC will be relatively larger, 30%. The remaining 15% is SC, ST. In 2005, 42 million they covered. And again, 51% were SC, ST, OBC. And 2013, 58 million they covered. And 58% were SC, ST, OBC. And the recent 2017, there is a reason to, it's a, purely based upon my discussion, 65% are SC, ST, OBC. First and foremost, we should remember or recognize the role of SC, ST and OBC in business is significantly increasing. That is something. In the 2017, actually, a smaller percentage, which is 35%, is only owned by what you may loosely call the other communities. That is not SC, ST and OBC. So that is the type of a thing which we should recognize. But at the same time, something else is also happening. They found that 95% of these enterprises, 95% of the, for instance, in 2005, we mentioned 42 million, are 95% are not financed by any financial institution. They are financed by family, caste, or community, and other extended friends. I hope I am making it clear. Not by any financial institution, mean not by any banks, cooperative banks, non-bank financial institution, nothing. Any financial institution in India. And this another survey also told that non-agriculture, non-corporate enterprises, again, 90% of it is not financed by financial institution. So the role of family and caste groups, extended family is extremely critical in this. And the role of caste is very major in terms of financing much of this activity. And a significant number of these activities will be also falling under what are called MSMEs in Indian jargon, what are called medium, small and micro enterprises. So the most important point which we should recognize is need for enhancing the credit delivery to these enterprises, small enterprises. And what is happening, as I told you, what we term it as Vaishyavization of India is taking place. Huge segments of our civic society is becoming Vaishyas. And the government hopefully should do the role of Kshatriya. But government was doing the role of Vaishya for a long period of time. Now they are slowly realizing that they have to get out of business and take care of law and order and defense and other. So that is the important point to remember. There are something like 900 and odd number economic clusters in India. Economic clusters mean where business activities taking place. Some type of a production, some type of a activity is taking place in a location. Of this, I have visited quite a large number of them in Tamil Nadu, in Karnataka, in Gujarat, in Punjab, and other things. And incidentally, almost all these 900 are caste clusters. This is very important to remember. Even though many government surveys and other things from the 50s have never mentioned this dimension. They made it appear as if they are swambhus and they come out on their own somewhere and then they are doing some activity and other thing, but they are caste clusters. In the late 80s, there was one planning commission document which mentioned in the context of leather industry about the Muslims as a community involved in leather activities. That's the only first time where the name was mentioned. Otherwise, but all of them are caste clusters. And many of them are, dominant caste is there in the sense, it doesn't mean that no other caste is allowed or anything like that. Primarily, one particular caste initiated the whole process of doing. Let me give some illustration. In the 40s, there was a drought in a place called Sivakasi in Tamil Nadu. And there's a lot of, it's an agricultural area and it's a drought prone actually. Two brothers traveled to Calcutta. Why Calcutta? In those days, Calcutta was actually the business center, like today, Bombay. So they, what is the best place to buy the book? Amazon. You can go and buy it. So they went to Calcutta, joined Wimco factory there. In those days, Wimco was one of the most attractive propositions. They joined not as a senior management or anything, as laborers, and they picked up some ideas about this sulfur and wood and all these things. They came back to, after 2-3 years, they were financed by another Nadar from Trichy. They started a small unit of making matches. This was in the 40s. And then the rest is history. Now today they are a $1 billion industry. They are into matches, they are into firecracker, they are into printing, incidentally. Because of firecrackers required huge amount of papers and other things, they went into printing, right? So that is the, somebody is asking about Nepal. No, that separate talk I have to give. Kindly, no point in making me jump into another. I have done studies on Nepal, Mauritius, Maldives, Fiji and other thing, but that's a separate thing, which has got a lot of commonality with what I am telling about India. Okay, now they have they have some of the best printing in the world, believe me. And I will tell you one interesting thing. Obama purchased some 500 diaries when he was the president to distribute among his very close-knit friends as a personal gesture, signed one. Believe me, they were all made in Sivakasi. And I also had occasion to only look at one. No, I couldn't, of course, afford to buy that, but I could look at one of them. So what I want to stress is they have come up, they are originally agriculturist. Let's be very clear about it. Another example one can give is Tirupur, which is also nearer to Coimbatore, which is again a agriculture area. The Gaundars there were traditional agriculturists. And till the 30s, till the 40s. Then sometime later, there was a huge drought and they again learned something about this spinning and weaving. They wanted to, they set up a small unit. Again, rest is history. Today, they are one of the largest exporters to Europe and US. Before pre-COVID, they were exporting of the order of some, 12,000 crore or something of that magnitude. They're very, and their whole community has got involved in this, and they have also come up. And then one can look at these patidars in, they are Kadwa Patels and Leva Patels. And I'm sure in US, many of you would know about the West Coast, where the motels are also called Patels actually. Nowadays, a significant number of them are owned and run by Patels. I am told one statistic, there are 76,000 units of hotels in US of different varieties, 5-star, 3-star, 2-star, and other thing. 24 of them, 24,000 are owned by Patels. Something very, very fascinating. And not only that, of that, 19,000 are by Patel from on a small place called Surat, very near to Ahmedabad. They are called Surtis also. So there is a huge, they were originally long time before agriculture. Similarly, that entire belt, Rajkot and other belt, which is drought prone. So there is a movement, they have moved into this. And diamond, most of you would be aware of it. I came to know because in the couple of decades before, I was in Antwerp for some other conference, not by diamond, don't mistake. And I saw in Brussels, in that town, one small, I was staying in a small 3-star or something. So I had this, what do you call, this hotel, which was providing this primarily bread and breakfast type. But in the morning, I saw on board there Jain meals. I was surprised actually. I can imagine veg and non-veg in Europe, but not. I asked the owner. He told they are one of our major customers. A small microscopic 0.0001% maybe Palanpur Jain they are called. They control significant amount of this diamond market today in Europe. To the extent, couple of I think maybe one day, 10 years before or something, Wall Street Journal wrote an article about them, that this is the first group which defeated Jews without violence in business. So that is something very, very interesting. It's a small group. Then you have the, diamond. Then you have the Ajanta clock and other thing. Then you have the, Bora, Muslims in Ahmedabad, which is kite industry, which used to be some 15-20 crore, and it became an international kite festival and other thing. Today it is of the order of 1100 crores. Then Punjab, Ramgariyas have made a huge amount, millions in terms of, we don't play good football or anything all over the world, but at least we make football and give it to other people to kick. So that is the type of a sports industry. There are several. So fundamentally, we have to recognize economic clusters are caste clusters. One step more I will go. The economic development in India is primarily because of our caste system. But for that, we would not have achieved what we have achieved today. And the states like UP, where I am asked to advise them, the government or Bihar, the problem is the caste is not a very good unit of business and commerce. And one more observation quickly I will like to make is the business and commerce unites caste actually within a caste as well as intra-caste, while as politics divides caste. But politics has done something interesting in India. As I told you, if you go back to what one can call 1891 census, there were so many sub caste and other things. But what has happened in the post-independence period, there is an aggregation which is taking place. So many examples I can give. For instance, some of you may be aware, I don't know, among Jat, there are 401 distinctions. Among Tevar, there are 3 major groups actually in Tamil Nadu, Agamadayars, Kallars and Maravars. And each of them have got some 30-35 subcaste. But slowly, post-independent, because of political reasons and vote important, they are aggregating. They are calling themselves Tevars. Same thing, they are calling themselves Patels. If you go back in history in 1910 or something, there were so many within, Lehua Patel, there were so many subcaste and other things. But there is an aggregation taking place on the political side. That is that. So in terms of number of caste, from that point of view has come down. Everybody is calling themselves Yadav, for instance. There are as many difference between a Meerut Yadav and a Benares Yadav. But all are, and Bihar Yadavs are also calling themselves P.S. Yadav. Anyhow, so there is an aggregation taking place on the political side. But caste, which predominantly focused on politics, have not done very well as a whole group. Because the system of reservation helps only an individual or a family. But business and commerce helps the entire caste. As I told you, if you go back to 1930s, Nadars were not such a major force in Tamil Nadu. Today, they are such a major economic force actually, in retail trade, in gold trade, in textiles, in hotels, so many places actually. And two communities, Nadars and this Gondar, according to my estimate, in the private sector, they may be controlling something like 40-45% of the GDP. Same thing about Gujarat. You have to, I don't want to go on the list and other thing. Buy the book and read, or I don't know, buy the book. That's much more critical, right? Okay. Now, what does this imply? One is the provision of initial capital comes due to this caste grouping. Lot of motel people have interviewed in western part of US. They told that initial capital has always come from extended family or from their uncle or from, in the sense of their caste group only. And they were also given market access. This is something very, very important. When a particular area develops, in Bangalore, for instance, it's a huge expansion is taking place. Then the person, I know a Mohammedan who has got a retail shop, his assistant went and set up another shop in one of these new areas with the financing help of the original person. So one more point we should remember, what we call child labor is a bogus terminology. It is the training for creating new job, new entrepreneurial activities. This is what we have to recognize. Same thing I have found in hotels. Many small hotels, those who are making preparation or serving, they go and start their own small establishment in new areas. So this market access is extremely important. And I should share this small thing. One person from this place, Tirupur, he was coming from, he is having extensive business in Europe. He was coming from Paris actually. He is one of the super premium passengers for the Air France because he travels every alternate week in first class, right? And his seat is reserved, and he is in small, ordinary dhoti and a plain, slack shirt. And so he was coming. I was in cattle class, nowhere near this thing. But we met in the thing, lounge, and I was talking to him. He knows only Tamil. I was talking to him. I asked him, how do you manage? Because you don't know English, you don't know. He told, Professor, in France also they don't know English. Don't worry about it. He told me. So what he meant is, you see, I know the language of money. I know their fashion. I know their requirement. And he was telling that time, it was a couple of decades before, years before, one new market was coming up in adjacent Yugoslavia. That time it has not split it into three. And he told, he is asking his nephew to take care of it. I told, why don't you do it? He says, others also can do business. What is there? Why should I? So this is something, not only is blood relative, others also is. And intricacies of local laws, regulations, and how to avoid it. That's another important thing. So because when you go, I can't come to California or I can't come to Arizona and set up business. There are a lot of local requirements are there. India, to some extent, we overcome that because of our ability to provide some extra cushion bribe to the regulators and the local inspectors and other. But that may not be always possible in every country. So US, the current one always tells you. For instance, there is a huge amount of this midday, what you may loosely call, what is called in the Bombay parlance, the tiffin carriers are created and then used in US, some of the places. Atlanta, I was there. Many of the Gujarati people prepare it and hot, they send it. And And in those days it used to be 499. I don't know. Now it may be whatever. The point is the whole thing is cash transaction. There is nothing called, what you may loosely call all your ledger book and this and that. And so again, the local laws and regulations, how to either overcome that or how to deal with that, another thing has to be. And these intricacies, you can go to a lawyer, for instance, or you can go to a chartered accountant, but it is very expensive. It is much better to learn only from your own caste people or something. They will tell you the correct information actually. They will tell you Mr. Brown is a nice fellow. You give him $100, he will take care of it. But Mr. King is not a good fellow. Like that, all those. And then availability of loyal labor. Again, a large number, even international level, people take labor from here only. They don't, use so much amount of local labor. Same thing about within India. Huge amount of local labor is taken from their village, and sometimes some loan is given for the village, and then that loan is adjusted again. Availability of credit, that's another important thing. As I told you earlier, 95% is not financed by institution. It's only it's easy because there is no paperwork to be done. One. Second, there need not be any huge amount of collateral to be given. Two, obviously the interest rates will be phenomenal. It can vary from 2 to 6% per month, right? So that's a very important point. Credit availability. But do they return the loan? Yes, because the cost pressure is so much. I don't know, you might have heard about izzat, or the concept of honor and other thing is very, very critical in this. So you would like to return. If it is not returned, it's an acceptance of failure. Then further help is also coming forward from the caste groups actually. They would come forward and then provide you help. So that's a sort of a thing. And one or two quick thing I would like to mention in this regard is one or two. One is the sociologist in India, at least, those who are not ridiculing caste or anything. They say the nation could be maintained successfully only when people are able to live with each other as groups. The group idea, this is sociologist, French sociologist, Emile Durkheim. He has also studied about our country. And Fukuyama, one of the very well-known historian, and he says that in his book Trust, he says one of the reasons why India could succeed is the reason of having this caste, because it's dependable, it is associates are. And of course, Swaminathan Iyer, our own local economist, he says social capital is very important. The most interesting thing is by two people, Eminent Srinivas, as well as by Gupta. Eminent Srinivas is the one first to identify that business and commerce will uplift the entire caste in social hierarchy, as well as in terms of ability to influence government decision. And he is the first one. And Gupta is the one who talks about, Dipankar Gupta talks about the so-called hierarchy. He says no. He has done extensive surveys. He says many a time when you meet people and ask, do you belong to backward caste? They will throw mud on his face actually. They'll say, who told you? We may be backward caste for our reservation and other facilities in government, but we are not backward. Actually, we were actually princely and kingly, and we were cheated, and we are now currently considered as what one can call the backward caste. So no caste member recognizes that they are backward caste. Most important point to note. Second is, all these caste fellows, people, they trace their origin to Surya, Chandra, and other. That is most important. They say there are Surya Vamsa, there are Chandra Vamsa, and other. Then Arundhadiyar, one group is there. They are actually listed community, scheduled caste. And they say, no, we come from actually much higher. No caste I have come across traces its origin to less than gods. Not the triumvirate, but all other gods, Indra, Chandra, Surya, nobody, takes in terms of. What has happened is the British influence is the one which has, particularly the influence of the church. I would squarely blame the church for the issue of this so-called, scheduled caste and others. They were the ones who propagated and popularized the term Dalit. There is no word called Dalit at all. There are Pallar, Parayar, so many type of Jata, so many, but they wanted to consolidate them into one single group called Dalit. And then, propagated that 1,000 years you have been oppressed and suppressed and other things. Many of the Dalits are actually big landlords in various parts of the country. They were not as it was presented. So let's, I will not get into clusters for more in terms of the distribution of. Most important thing is a recent book which has come about the modern capitalists in India. That book is written by EMS Nambudribhat. Some of you might have heard about him. He is one of the founders of the Communist Party, Marxist, one of the great leaders of Indian Communist movement from Kerala. His grandson has written that book actually, The Modern Capitalist Class. He says there are three, there are about caste, about Chettiars and Marwaris. I am not, bringing in now for this reason. It is so much known in the past also. He said three routes are taken nowadays, according to his hypothesis. He says one route is from agriculture to entrepreneurship. That's what we mentioned about in terms of our Gaundars, in terms of our Nadars, then Kammas, then Reddys, different state, even Patidars. Agriculture to entrepreneurship, they have come up in the last, so something like 50, 60 years, you may call it. Then other group is from, in terms of from mercantile class into business, trading. Like that is the traditional, we all know about it, Marwaris, then Baniyas, then various other groups have trading they started with, and over a period, Chettiars, over a period of time they have become into industrialist and other. The third group is the white collar group, which is in the last 20, 30 years, which has come from the what you may loosely call the white collar jobs into mostly into IT and IT related activities. They have become very big entrepreneurs in various parts of the country. So these are the three types of routes he is talking about. And the other point is the supposedly Dalit, what is called by the Christian church. Many of them have also got into Vaishyavization process. Very important. There are some Dalit Chamber of Commerce. Many of you might have heard about it. It is consulted by the Ministry of Finance before formulating their budget. So it's not something which there are very, very major Dalit industrialists, both in the south as well as in the north. Saroj, one of the major industrialists, she is sitting on the board of many companies actually. So every caste in India, as of now, what we understand, to the era of Vaishyavization is taking place, whether one likes it or not. Business and commerce is their primary goal. And the caste which are not into that are finding it disadvantage, actually. They are agitating on this and that. You may come to power as chief minister also, but it doesn't help, because beyond a point, you cannot offer jobs to your own people in the government. And that's a major constraint, actually. And in the context of currently, government coming out of business, it's going to be much more tricky for. So if you get into commerce and business, it unites the caste as well as with other caste. Because caste which are in commerce and business, kindly know, want peace and what one can call certain amount of stability, law and order. An example could be a group went into, there are some people who are manufacturing matches who belong to the listed community. Listed by that I mean scheduled caste, scheduled tribe in Shivagasi area. Some group went and told them you should join some agitation or something. They told they are not interested because they told we have customers from various other, we have all type of customers. We don't want to antagonize anybody. See, if you are in business and commerce, very important is market is very critical for you. And market could be anybody. Market need not necessarily be from your caste or from your group or anything. So by and large, you would like to have some amount of peace and prosperity to come forward. For instance, lot of surveys of Boras have indicated in Ahmedabad, they are totally not enthusiastic about this riots and other things. And some of you who may be knowing the history, know entire during the 60s and 70s, city was always rocked by riots, particularly during this Jagannath Yatra and other. Anyhow, so business and commerce unites. Let's be very clear about it. Whereas politics divides. Politics helps in terms of aggregation of caste. That's something very, very interesting we should remember. The last important issue is, everybody says, how do you know about no caste or something? It's actually, it has become much more what one can call deeply impacting people after the arrival of this internet and other things. You go to the internet, you find out how many nadars are there in Tamil films industry. A big list will be opened up for you. You find out how many Sunni Muslims are there in Bollywood. Another big list will come for you. So, and similarly about marriage. You go into these matrimonial sites in this internet, you'll be surprised actually. There are so many sect, subcaste and other things. Nadar Christians. And they say they would prefer Brahmin Christians, whatever it means, and Nadar Christians only. You should go and see all these things. Caste is not dead or anything. There is a global, what one can call, grouping of various communities in the internet. You may not be aware of it. You should, if you are not aware of it, I am not, you should go and see how much is the impact. There are so many sites for Yadavs and a lot of sites for Gauda Saraswat Brahmin. One lady asking, I am preparing this dish and this has not come out well in from Alabama. And another in Auckland is responding to her. This is how my mother used to make it. And you may try this. This with the time gap and other thing. It's extraordinarily fascinating. What I would say is the arrival of internet and social media is consolidating caste. People say all this modernism will remove caste, nothing doing. It is actually what is happening is more and more, and people are now going into roots and other things. I am coming from such and such a village in Balia, and my great grandfather was a freedom fighter, and so others all help him in order to formulate. Some of you will know about Leon Uris' roots, formulate his roots and so do not go by this popular opinion. This all this modern gadgets will come and they are all abolished. No, they are actually consolidating caste. They are, because identity is something extremely critical. Last point is very important. It was made by one of the perceptive observer of politics in India, belonging to Islam tradition. He told, Professor, you are right, because everybody says abolish caste and other thing. Then we have to create one identity called Hindu identity. And that is going to be a extraordinarily complicated thing for others to handle in the world. So having large number of sub-identities is also extremely beneficial. From our, in the sense he was telling, he is a Islamic sociologist. So before I close, I would like to mention one interesting thing. Swami Vivekananda, I am sure he doesn't require introduction for an audience of this nature. Everybody knows he came to Chicago and gave a lecture and came back to India. And when he came back, he was so, by then the message has spread, and as usual, when somebody gets a name and fame in a foreign country, particularly in US, then only you get recognized in India. Is very important because our umbilical cords are tied with US. I always say our DNA is tied with US. Who is going to listen to me if I say that caste is important? But if I say I'm a 2 times Fulbright scholar, then people, oh, okay, there is something this fellow may be. So very important. So Vivekananda is 100 example I can give. Nobody would have seen Satyajit movie but for him getting that award in that Venice Film Festival. Anyhow, so Vivekananda came and everybody was organizing some welcome address by him. When he went, nobody bothered about him actually, except that Kashi Maharaj who gave him and the Chettiars who gave him some funds in Madras. Anyhow, he was speaking. That's called actually from Colombo to Almora. That time Sri Lanka was part and parcel of our Indian thing in terms of culture. So he was taken to Jaffna. He went to. He gave a speech at actually Jaffna, 1897. He said, "The older I grow, the better I seem to think of these time-honored institutions of India." He says, "Older I grow." He lived up for 38 only. I can't believe this. He was just 37 point something, 38. But
39.
older
39.
Yeah.
39. Yeah.
Something. Okay. There was a time when I used to think that many of them were useless and worthless, these institutions. But older I grow, the more I seem to feel a diffidence in cursing any one of them. For each of them is an embodiment of experience of centuries. It's not something which has come about yesterday or something. He says in his lectures from Colombo to Almora in Jaffna, 1897, page number and other thing I have given in that other one. So, in conclusion, of course, primarily we are a partnership proprietorship economy, and finance is based on family and caste, clusters of activity by caste and community. So we have to be very clear, and we are suggesting based upon our own research that caste is one of the major engines of India's economic growth. So we should celebrate actually caste. Let me repeat it. We should celebrate caste, not abuse it. And we have a standard tendency, anything which we should celebrate, we will abuse it. So that's our, why? Because some white man has come all the way from abroad and he has abused it some 100 years before. So we will continue to do that. We shouldn't do that actually. That's not a good thing. So recognize their role and celebrate. That is what I would say. Thank you very much.
All right, terrific. Professor Vaidyanathan, thank you so much. Thank you all for joining. We'll take a few more minutes, maybe a couple of questions. So I have a question for you. You made a distinction between these unorganized sector, you call it the proprietorship, economy, right? As distinct from the organized sector consisting of the big companies like the Tatas and Birlas and other big conglomerations and so on. Now, can you say what percentage of the India's economy is constituted by the unorganized sector, which is based primarily on these caste social capital type of networks and relationships?
If you look at the Indian economy, approximately 18 to 20% is government. Government, I mean state government, central government, public sector enterprises, everything put together. G capital, 18 to 20%. Agriculture is roughly again 17 to 18%. Let's take it as 20 itself, right? So agriculture is predominantly in the private hands in India, in spite of Nehruvian socialism and other thing. Stalin was not the main thing, right? So except this forestry, which is with the government. Anyhow, this 20 of government, 20 of agriculture constitute 40. Roughly 10 to 12% is the corporate sector, what you may loosely call company or corporate or something. The remaining 45 to 50% is unincorporated partnership proprietorship firms in India. And they are predominantly in activities, service activities, wholesale trade, retail trade, construction, hotels and restaurant, then other type of, what one can call construction, transport, private transport, and all your work like, your fitter, plumber, carpenter, all of them who are called what in your jargon, self-employed fellows, right? That will, all that put together will be roughly 45% at least, 50% in that range. I'm telling just the range because each year it can be slightly different.
Yeah, very good. Excellent. So, I mean, that's an important fact that nearly half the Indian economy is resting on these unorganized, loose social networks, which are caste-based. Now, one of the important things that we ought to continually come back to is that the British colonial era, badly damaged the Hindu society, the Indian society, right? And the literally almost, it's estimated that nearly $45 trillion current day US dollar terms was extracted out of India over a 200-year period, where previously well-entrenched manufacturing businesses, clusters of communities that were engaged in manufacturing of various kinds were reduced to labor and to agricultural labor and so on. So there was a kind of a, if you can think of it in these terms, they were de-Vaishyavized during the British period. And now the Vaishyafication that Professor Vaidyanathan is talking about is simply the slow reversal of a process that happened over a 200-year period. And hopefully in over the next few generations, in a couple of 100 years, or at least another 100 years, these castes will return back to their economic condition and status where they used to be prior to the enormous loot of India that took place during the British era. This is important, and it is often overlooked in contemporary discourse. Instead, the West is presented. The West presents itself as the model to which Indian society ought to aspire towards. So, any other questions? Let's see. There are questions in the Q&A box. Ankur, you can take it from here. And
yeah, there's a few questions. Kalyanji and Irvinji have been answering some of them. This is a complicated conversation. We're going to continue to discuss Varna and Jati kind of separately also. Some of those questions will be addressed later. I love the first question in the Q&A box by Devangji, because he actually read the book. He cites page 27. You mentioned that data shows that 65% of Hindu women were entrepreneurs and ran financial establishments, which is significantly high compared to Muslims at 12.84% and Christians at 5.2%. Is it right to conclude that, contrary to established belief, Hindu women were not as oppressed as other women of other religions? And what is your extrapolation on the role of women in the economy compared to other religions? And he's citing page 27 of your book.
Yeah, I don't understand. What is the question?
Well,
is it
right to go ahead, Kalyanji, if you can reframe it?
So, so the question is it right to conclude that contrary to established belief, Hindu women are rather not oppressed compared to the women from the Muslim and Christian communities?
Hindu women are oppressed is the biggest bogus thing. I know nobody takes it seriously, including Hindu women. Let me be very frank. Other than some, JNU studied or somebody in one of your US universities, Hindu women themselves do not take it seriously. Okay, our three major benefit-giving gods are women. Let's be very clear about it. The wealth is given by Lakshmi. Education is given by Saraswati. Power is given by Durga. It's not male gods. Male gods won't give you anything. Let me be very clear. If you go to Shiva temple, you will get some vibhuti or something, which I am putting it on my forehead. If you go to Vishnu temple, you will get some water, tulsi water. That's all. The material benefit givers are all women gods. And I will tell you, no major decision is taken in business houses, even today, Indian business houses. I'm not talking about MNCs and other, without the nod of the wife of the owner. So all this, anyhow, Hindu women are not oppressed or suppressed or something like that. These are very good for, writing some thesis and getting your PhD, but nothing to do with reality.
Great. So if people can put your question, sorry, do you have another thought on that? I was just going to give some direction. Please, if you have a question for Professor Vaidyanathan, put it in the Q&A box. In the chat, it scrolls. It's hard to.
Yeah, somebody has asked about the intercaste marriage. What is that? Somewhere I saw. Somebody has.
Yeah, what did you find in terms of intercaste marriages, limitations, or limitations on any more?
Intercaste marriages are, minuscule. Let's be very clear. But as and when the interesting thing is a new caste emerges. I have studied in Andhra Pradesh about this phenomena. So some of the intercaste marriages which were, significantly large in the earlier part of the 20th century, they have created new caste. Actually, no, it's by and large what happened in intercaste marriage. Mostly the woman has to get into the activities of the husband side in terms of all those samskaras I told you. Otherwise, what happened? A new caste is created. Combination of Velamas and Kamas have got some new groups which have come about. That's all will happen over a period of time. So there is as earlier I think it's not a frozen system. Let's be very clear about it. They move up and move down. New things are created, new activities, new type of settings are made over a long period of time. It's not, if you ask 500 years before exactly was this Jat subcaste in the same? No, one cannot. One has to go back, and there could be huge number of things coming up. Actually, these intercaste marriages are made a big deal now. Again, these are Western influences. I would say nobody takes it very. And again, only between the listed communities, what is called SC, ST and other communities, there is a problem in intercaste marriage that's created by the church. Let's be very clear about it. There are no problem. If a Tevar marries a Gounder, there are no problem. P. Chidambaram, one of the biggest, richest Chettiar, married a Gounder lady. In his P. Chidambaram was a minister in our cabinet. Actually, I can give hundreds of examples. Other caste, there is no Ahirs and Kurmis. There is no battle. Yadavs and Jat, there is no battle. The primarily comes when a SC man marries a non-SC girl deliberately, because it is instigated by the church. Let me tell it very clearly. Otherwise, there would not be any problem there also. So whenever we talk about intercaste problem, we are only talking about SC and other groups, not between two, what you may loosely call the OBCs. Let's be very clear. No intercaste problem between the OBCs. Between Kurmis and Bhumihars, they may have their own jokes about them and how the others are dead and other. That's a different issue. But there is no war. There is no fight. So that's the thing. Intercaste will sort out by itself. Nothing. New caste will be created. That's all.
Great. So we have a few more minutes.
Why is the crime against women going up? Totally wrong question to ask me. India is one of the lowest crime in the whole world. Ask the person who asked the question to study the statistics globally compared to other countries. Great. And other countries, many of time we read in the papers in US and other, this date rape and other thing is not even recorded. Not even reported actually in the many universities and other. So look at the statistics and then say that crime against women is going up. No.
Thank you.
Higher caste women violating women of no. All these are just, I think,
So,
not,
so I think
not just statistics.
one point there. See, many of the people in the webinar, they get their news from news media that sensationalize an isolated event to draw a general
Let me tell you,
conclusion.
sir, if you don't mind my telling, Washington Post, New York Times are not the papers to read about India. Let me be very clear. And Trump told in some other context about these two papers, but I am telling it in the context of India. Because those who write in that paper, I know them personally, their mindset, they don't write based on, they write based upon sensationalism, actually. How to, okay?
Yeah, and this is one reason why this webinar is so important and your work is so important, because we're looking at data, trying to separate from emotions. And somebody else wrote in the chat, New Delhi is the rape capital of the world. But if you look at the stats in America, 33% of women in America have faced some sort of sexual assault in this country itself. So again, if you look at the data and you compare it, that's what we're getting at. We're not saying it's not a problem. It's an issue in that specific instance, but to generalize and apply it to that's the mistake. It needs to be addressed. We need to empower women. That's part of the whole conversation. But again, separate the emotion from the stat.
Simple thing. There is nothing too much address. US has destroyed its families. Forget about outside community and other thing. 73% of the births of blacks are outside wedlock. So the Black Life Matter, they say, they matter in the kids also. 73% last year, I have got statistics on that. 52% of the whites' births are outside wedlock. They have destroyed their families. They have destroyed the institution of marriage, institution of families. They are going somewhere. It's nowhere they are going. Let me tell you, because the alternatives have not also come. It's a huge, government dependent society they have created. 60% of the Americans are dependent on somewhere or other gratis from the government. Food stamp, healthcare, something. 60% of the Americans are dependent. So families have been nationalized in USA. Business is getting privatized. Families are nationalized. I mean, all the family have to be taken care by the government. So they are, they are not, a society which many people in India will look upon or give respect or anything. Let me be, I shouldn't be so blunt, but I am telling you. So that's somebody says they are taking it to the UN, and let them take it to UN. What is that? UN itself will be closed in matter of couple of years or something. I'm sure if Trump wins again, he will come out of UN. I can bet to you, he will come out of WTO as well as UN. So, if he wins, I don't know what you are all going to do, right?
We'll see in a few days. To continue this conversation, please consider enrolling in our Orientation to Hindu Studies course. This is such a deep and complicated issue. I just put it in the chat. Please consider enrolling and continue this conversation with us.
Some more people, my Gmail you can announce in case they want, they can write to me also.
Okay, thank you for volunteering that. I'll put it in the chat if that's okay with you.
Yeah, you can share it. rvaidya2000@gmail.com. And I am also on Twitter with some 1 lakh followers. rvaidya2000. Again, same thing. So whoever is interested, is there a course offered? Yes, I used to offer a course at IIM Bangalore. I'm now retired. If you want me to offer a course, I will offer at a fee, of course. Right? Some lady says she is not very feeling safe in India. I tell her, don't bother. Don't worry about it. You are very much safe.
I don't know about that. How people feel, that's an internal personal thing. And just not addressing it, I don't think that's helpful. But I understand what you're saying in terms of the stats and the other aspects of it. But how a woman feels, that's up to her to decide, right? And that's something that we got to be clear of. And I appreciate the conversation. Let's keep it going. I think there's some more questions in the chat if you want to look at it, or the Q&A box.
Somebody says why caste census is not released. I thought I told it very clearly. The census revealed a significantly different number than what is commonly believed. It's not going to be very easy for different political parties to come to new terms, right? So that's a thing. Common civil code. No, I never told it cannot be implemented. It's extremely difficult, I was telling. Because within the Hindu system itself, there are innumerable amount of, some of you may or may not be knowing about it. There is a different type of schools in Hindu undivided family. Not all the schools are following the same issue. For instance, in South, I can know a person can marry his paternal side daughter. But in Bengal province, it is not permitted. Either side, maternal or paternal side. Like that, I can go on. So Mitakshara laws are not the same as Dayabaga school. These are, I don't want to get into these are too intricate, but what I want to stress is it's not very easy to, unless you impose this European common civil code on Indians. That's also not going to be very easy, right?
Irvinji suggests going back to the...
It's not only Hindu-Muslim. Let's be very clear about it. This common civil code is much... Even in France, you wait and see. It's not going to be easy to introduce the common civil code, right?
Yeah. Arvinji says, let's get back to the Q&A box. People who put in questions early. Pradeep G says, you were critical of the tenet for Jati caste in earlier days. Based on your point about business and Vaishya orientation across all castes, what holds caste together now?
India accepted a woman PM. But more important, we have so many chief ministers who are women. Everybody remembers only Indira Gandhi. But most of the states had women CMs. Even today, actually, West Bengal has got a woman CM. UP had a woman CM. Tamil Nadu, oh God, almost. So there's nothing. And then so many IAS officers, pilots, and the proportion of women pilots, I think one statistics you should know, is highest in India actually, compared to any other country in the world. The women pilots to commercial pilot, I mean. And then now some of them are also fighter pilots. This whole thing that women are oppressed and suppressed is, it's very nice to talk about, but nothing to look forward to. Correct?
So we have two minutes.
All right. So what holds caste together now? It's not just based on birth, right? And with 2 minutes, maybe you can go into some closing thoughts. And if Kalyanji wants to add to it. Professor Vaidyanathan?
Nothing. See, there is somebody asking ministers at, there are so many ministers at the center. Actually, our finance minister is a woman. So anyhow, I think let me be very blunt. Purely comparing US and India, we have large number of women occupying critical positions. Volunteer. And another important thing is US, UK, they fought for getting the right to vote. At the time of independence, there was not even a discussion in the Constituent Assembly of India about providing women the right to vote. You can imagine, there was not even a discussion. It was assumed that they should have a right to vote. They should participate. This is a very simple. And large number of states have implemented 1/3 of the seats of bodies are women today. It's implemented already. So 1/3, 33% is that of women. So there is what you may loosely call significant portion of Indian women occupy important position and not based upon any fight or anything. It is just there for them, right? Yeah. Anyhow, so what I loosely call in 1673 only, the church agreed that women have soul. So I don't think they need to pass any judgment on Indian treating women and other thing. In 1670, that was one of the thing which they finally decided after several congregations and other thing. The monks, the women also have souls.
So we are at the top of the hour. We should wrap up right now. So Vaidyanathan, thank you very, very much for your time today.
Large number of financial institutions in India are headed by women. We should know that also. Significant number of financial institutions, banks, brokerage houses, and term lending banks, insurance companies are all headed by women. And without any, big, what you call song and dance. There is never it is published that they have, what is it called? Breaking the glass ceiling. There are no ceilings to break at all. So they just come and sit there. The largest bank, State Bank of India, had 2 women chiefs actually in the recent past. Anyhow, okay.
Okay. All right. Vaidyanathan ji, thank you very much for your joining us today. And we look forward to a future occasion when we can meet again.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I will just wrap up today's conversation by saying that this is an ongoing discussion, okay? And I think we're going to get into this subject much more. And in particular, the question of, if the word caste is a Western imposition on India, and if the words we used in our own terminology was Varna and Jati, how do they relate with each other? Are they the same thing? Are they different things? What is the particular characteristic of the distortion that gets generated when you translate from one to the other? Okay, so that's an important question. We'll pick that up in future webinars. Stay tuned. We hope to get more and more voices speaking on this topic and get into this subject in depth. Thank you all. Namaste. See you.
Yeah, thank you also. Thank all the audience. All the questions I could not answer, but still, hopefully they will get some more into my book, as well as my Gmail has been provided. So thank you very much. Thank you all for your patience.
Ankur, put the orientation to Hindu studies course in the chat box one last time.
One more time, please enroll. We'll be starting in January. It's an important course. It introduces us, and we'll continue the conversation that's in the chat. Orientation to Hindu studies. Please enroll.
All right. Thank you all. Namaste.
Namaste.